Good morning, and Daf Yomi is sponsored for the month by Michael Tzaidi for Hatzlach with making Aliyah and in honor of his father, of his late father, Zohar ben Ruvain, Zechron Levracha, and Daf Yomi for the month. He's also sponsored by Moshe and Susie Federle Nishmas, Mr. Feder's father, Aryeh ben Michal, whose Yortzeit was on the 15th of Elul, and Nishmas, Mrs. Feder's mother, Roize Bas Simcha Cohen, whose Yortzeit was on the 18th of Elul. May the Neshamas have an Aliyah. We are Daf Yud Amud Beis, 5 lines from the bottom. Tanan Hossam, we learned in a Mishnah over there, Shahaya Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Akiva would say, Kol damim shenichnesu lehechal lechaper psulim, that the Rabbi Akiva was of the position that all korbanos that the slaughtering was done outside in the Beis Hamikdash's courtyard. If the blood went inside, so then that would invalidate the blood. Not supposed to go there. That's not where it belongs. And once it goes in there, then they become nullified. Now, Chamim Omrim, the Chum say Chatas Bilva. That is only true of the Korban Chatas. It's not true of all of the other ones, because the Korban Chatas, we have ones that are brought inside, we have ones that are brought outside. Ones that are brought outside belong outside, ones that are brought inside belong inside, but not supposed to be switched around. But the reason why we're bringing this is because Rabbi Eliezer says Af Asham, the Asham as well. Because remember that the whole disagreement that Rabbi Akiva, the Chachamim and Rabbi Eliezer have been disagreeing about is that Rabbi Eliezer compares the Korban Asham to the Korban Chatos. And he says that whatever rules are applicable to a Korban Chatos, that's the sin offering, are the same as the rules by a Korban Asham, the guilt offering, other than the averos that they're brought for, right? As we said, Korban Asham is brought only for specific types of averos, like we had the Shuas Bitui, when somebody takes a false oath, but Korban Chatas is for any avero that if you would do it on purpose, you would get kares. If you do it negligently, you bring a Korban Chatas. Okay, so that's Shenemar. Why does he say that? Because he says, Ka Chatas, Ka Asham. He says that the Korban Chatas and the Korban Asham, Kachatas, Ka'asham, they are the same. Bishlam Rabbi Eliezer Kidakamar Taima. So I understand Rabbi Eliezer's position. He says his reason, right? The Korban Chatas and the Korban Asham, right? El Rabbanan, my time, but why do the Rabbanan hold what they hold? Amar Rava says, Asham nichnas damo lifnim pasol lo matzas amart. He says, you can't presume that a Korban Asham's blood that goes into the Beis Hamikdash, you can't say that that's going to be nullified because Kal v'chomer, because we have we would have you have a Kal v'chomer, right? A logical deduction from the Korban Olah, right? Which is that Oma Olah shehi kolil nichnas. If when it comes to a Korban Olah, going into the Beis Hamikdash doesn't invalidate the blood of the Korban Olah, and an Olah is a stricter sacrifice because all of its body is consumed on the Mizbeach in fire, right? You don't eat any of it. So, Dama Lifnim Ksher, its blood is okay and kosher on the inside, whether according to Chacham, even according to Eliezer, right? Because it's not compared to the Olah is not compared to the Chatos.
But if you do Korban Olah on the Mizbeach, how can you spread the blood if it's completely gone?
Blood is not burnt up, right? The blood is caught in a utensil and then is brought and sprinkled on the mizbeach, right? The other parts of the animal are burnt up, right? So in Asham she'eno kol, the Korban Asham is not burnt up completely. Lo kol shkin, for sure. That's less. Seems to be less. I guess elevated as the Korban Olah. If that one isn't, if the Korban Olah isn't validated, for sure, Nasham is not as well. Yeah, but that's not necessarily true because, as we always are learning, there's differences between each of the sacrifices. It's very difficult to learn a Kavachomer one to the other and have the Gemara just move on. Ma la'olah shekein eno mechaperes. Look, a Korban Olah doesn't acquire atonement, whereas a guilt offering does get you atonement. Minchas choti tochiach. Well, I'll show you the sin offering that is brought from flour. Now, as we said, that there are certain times that a Korban Olah v'yored is brought, right? A variable offering, that's the translation, the variable offering. And for certain averos, like we had somebody who was tummy coming into the Beis Hamikdash, right? You bring this variable offering, and it depends on how much money you have, whether you bring an animal, or you bring a bird, or you bring flour.
Mm-hmm. I heard that it varies on status, not just money. Like a Kohen Gadol of Eastern, you would have to bring a bull.
So that is different issue, right? That's a matter of the king and the Kohen Gadol have a special sacrifice for their sin offering. This is for specific sins that the Korban Olah v'yored are applicable for, right? Most of the time, that Kohen bull and that the one for the Beis Din, which we learned about in Maseches Horios, was brought specifically for the same averos that a regular person would bring an animal offering for. This is a variable offering, and we had discussed whether the korban for the Kohen Gadol, whether he was applicable to this altogether, whether he had to bring a variable offering or not. We said he didn't. The Kohen Gadol doesn't have to bring. He doesn't even bring his bull for these averos either, because he can't become poor. Right? We said if you can't become poor, then he can't bring the variable offering at all. We said the king also couldn't bring this because, right, was an argument back and forth over there. But the variable offering is separate than a regular sin offering. Okay? So it's important to make these distinctions. The nice thing about this parak is, even if you don't remember every detail of everything, you're going to hear a lot of you're going to be exposed to a lot of sacrifice language and things that are going on with all of them, so that when we get to the details of each of them, you go, okay, I know a little bit about that, right? You know already. What was nice is, I don't know if you got to the vidoy, I should have stopped before, right? Where you say, like the averos that we have to bring korban and we go, I know that one. That's the positive commandments. The one achatos, yes, I know those. Those are the los ases where you get curries for. Then the korban olav yored, okay, I know the 5 of those, right? Okay, so it's like the asham. So you get to look at those and go, I know what these korbanos are now. At least we've gotten to the point where, okay, 11 pages in, we can all say ola, chatos, asham talui. We know which ones that shlamim. We know those are it. We don't know. There's this ideal. There's all because it's a minchas we haven't gotten into yet. There's minchas and the bird offerings we haven't gotten into, but we know the Zevachim so far. So at least it's always like the thing. It's like where you start exercising and dieting. If you haven't gotten, like, you're like 3 weeks in, you're like, where's all the progress? This is the progress. You have to be able to measure your progress, right? We see it's working here. Okay, so now the lema, he says, okay, but the minchas chote tochiach, the korban mincha of the where you bring in flour, right? It acquires an atonement, but if you bring, we don't have blood by that, but if you bring if you bring that offering into the Beis HaMikdash, it doesn't invalidate that offering. These rules of the details of which ones are invalidated, which ones are not invalidated, get brought down in detail in discussions later on in Daf Pei Aleph. So we're not going to go into them in great detail here. But the other than to focus on the idea that Rabbi Eliezer is comparing his asham to chatos, right, and everybody else who doesn't compare to asham to chatos says, hey, look, korban chatos doesn't follow the same rules as any of these other korbanos. They're different. What about the bird? Why didn't they answer the sin offering that's brought for a bird? Why they skip all the way down to the one that's brought for flour? The one for the bird also is not invalidated if it goes into the Beis HaMikdash, and that would prove it. He says, Chatas of boi de Rabbi Abinhi. The answer is because that one Rabbi Abin wasn't sure about. He wasn't sure if that's invalidated because it is a blood offering, and it might be invalidated if it goes to the Beis HaMikdash. So since we weren't sure about that one, we don't want to bring that into the issue here. We at least know there is a sin offering where you get atonement, and if it goes into the Beis HaMikdash, it's not invalidated. Therefore, the fact that the olah goes in and is not invalidated, it isn't only because it's an elevated offering, and if you got an atonement, that would be stricter, because here's an offering that gets an atonement, and it isn't different. It isn't stricter.
It's a mincha. It is
a mincha, but the olah is not. Oh, so this is the system that we've been using. If you've got a strictness or a leniency that two different ones have, then you have to be able to. But they have the same rule. You cannot say that the law is caused by their additional stringency. Right? This one is an atonement. Okay, but this one is not an atonement. Okay, but this one is burnt on the mizbeach. But this one is not. Okay, great. So now we know the thing in common is that if it's not a korban chatos, it doesn't invalidate. It's not an animal chatos, it doesn't invalidate.
Right.
Okay, but v'lichfroch, let's ask the question. Ma le minchas chote she'ena min zevach. It's not an animal offering. Can't be right. That's what it says. Ola tochiach. Now we go back, right? We say the ola, right? Because we were just having the conversation. The korban ola shows it. V'chazaradin. So we go back and forth. Lo reizek reizev, lo reizek reizeh. We say that the stringencies of each of those are not similar. Hatzad hashaveh shabahen. The thing that is equivalent is shehin kodshei kodshim. They are the holiest of holy types of offerings. V'nichnas lifnin. And if you bring them into the Beis HaMikdash ksherin, they are not invalidated. Af ani may. Avi asham, so I can bring asham. Same category, right? Holy of holy offerings gets brought into the Beis HaMikdash. It does not get invalidated. Shehu kodesh kadoshim v'nichnas dama lifnim kosher.
Holy offering can only be brought in.
Not into the holy of holies. It's a kodshei kodshim. It's a holy offering, not into the place called the holy of holies, right? Kodshei kodshim is the offering is the holy, because we had two different levels of offerings. We had kodshei kodshim and kodshei kalim, the light holy things. The holy things and the light holy things. Those are the different types of animal sacrifices. Right? Amar le Rava mi Barnish le Rav Ashi. So Rava from Barnish says to Rav Ashi, there's a question on Rava's statement, Velifroch. Let's ask the question. You know what is unique about those two, the Ola and the meal and this flour offering, the Chatas Shekain Eina Lahen Kitzva. They have no set amount of value, right? You can bring of any amount of value, no minimum value, Tomer Ba'asham, which is not true of the Korban Asham. We'll learn about the Korban Asham later. We're going to learn Shigesh Lo Kitzva. It has a minimum set value of 2 selah. When you bring a Korban Asham, you've got a minimum value for that sacrifice. That sacrifice is stricter than the other ones. So therefore, and you can't say, well, you can't find another offering that has that. So therefore, it could be that the Asham is invalidated because it has that additional stringency that these other offerings don't have. Ella, Hainu Tainarabah. So we abandon that. You're fair point. Can't learn it from the other ones. But here's the rabbi's rationale. Why is it that a Korban Chatos is invalidated, but the other Korbanos are not? Because the Pasuk says, that's always the default answer, because the Pasuk said so. And that is, the Pasuk says, V'chol Chatos asher yuva midama, the Pasuk says, dama, it's blood, then it has to be burnt. Dama, meaning that dama shel zu v'lo dama shel acher. This blood, this korban, the korban chatos, if you bring it into the Beis HaMikdash, it must be burnt. It has to be destroyed. Not the case by any of the other ones. Okay. The answer, but the other ve'idach. What about Rabbi Eliezer? What's he going to hold? He says dama v'lo bisara. He says, it's blood. Right, is not, but is invalidated, but not the flesh. Meaning, if the animal's meat, the meat of the animal is brought in, that doesn't invalidate. Only the blood. So that's why he talks about blood, not to exclude the korban asham. So what about the idach? What are the rabbis? How do they learn that the blood is the only thing that invalidates, not the meat? The answer is dama. He has the two phrases, right? We've had this before, where the word dama is unnecessary, right. But it's actually 2 words, right? In English, we say blood, dama, it's blood, it's 2 words, dama. So therefore, I've got 2 words to learn from here, and therefore I can learn both rules from that. Vidach dama, lo darsh, the other one says, no, it's 1 word, right? So therefore, you don't need to learn 2 things from it. And so therefore, it's only to tell me the meat, not the, but therefore you could include a korban asham to be invalidated. Okay, now, bishlam al rabbanon, I understand the rabbi's point of view. They say, in our Mishnah, that if you slaughter the korban asham and you're thinking of a different sacrifice, it's not invalidated, right?
Why is that? If we already learned from other sacrifices?
Well, because we have said that it was compared to all of the other sacrifices, right? The korban asham. Only Rabbi Eliezer compares the korban chatas to the korban asham, right? So, hainu de iskish mincha lechatos, mincha leasham. So I understand why the korban asham gets compared in 2 ways. It's compared to 2 things. The mincha is compared to a chatos, and the mincha is compared to an asham. We're going to see. The Tanya, here's the brisa. Rabbi Shimon Amar Shimon says, Kadosh Kadoshim this korban mincha is holy of holies. It's kachatas v'cha'asham. Right. It is so holy. It's like a korban chatas and like a korban asham. Now, that's a problematic statement, because if you're Rabbi Eliezer, you don't need to compare it to the korban chatas and to the korban asham, because they're the same. You already compared the 2 of those together. Why is it kachatos v'cha'asham? Minchas choti harehi kechatos. So this brisa explains why. Because the minchas chote, the sin offering of a korban, of a mincha offering, the mincha offering of a person who sinned, is like a korban chatas, in such that leficha kamsa shelo lishma. If you take its kmitza, right, that's the slaughtering equivalent. You basically have the flour in the bowl, and you take a scoopful like so, right, and you bring that, and you put that into a second utensil. So if you do that without the right intent, psula, that invalidates the offering, just like it does by a korban chatos. That's how the minchas chote is like a korban chatos. Right. And how is it minchas nedav and minchas nedava and a mincha that is being brought as a gift, harehi ke'asham. That one's like a korban asham. Lefichach, therefore, kamtza shelo lishma, if you bring that one without the right intent, so kshera, then it's kosher. Right? There is a mincha that's like a chatos, and there's a mincha like an asham. Sometimes it depends on which korban mincha you're bringing. A korban mincha that's a chatos korban mincha is like a korban chatos. A korban mincha that's not a chatos is like the asham in that it is acceptable if you bring it not for the right intent. Okay.
Why would you bring a mincha offering as a gift?
You can make a donation, right? You can make an ola, right? You can make, if let's say you're a poor person, you want to make a donation, right? You can bring a $10 gift to the base of Mikdash, right? A quick korban that is inexpensive, and everybody can participate, right? So, Rabbi Eliezer, l'mayochasa. Well, according to Rabbi Eliezer, he says the chatos and the yasham are both not good. So, what's the point of comparing the mincha to a korban asham and a korban chatos? They have the same rule. None of them would be valid. So the answer is itkas mincha lechatos or mincha l'asham. A mincha is compared to a chatos and to an asham lechi iduch de Rabbi Shimon because of this other brisa that Rabbi Shimon says. D'tznan we learned in this other teaching of Rabbi Shimon which we learned in a Mishnah. Shalo bekli shares psula. If you take the kmitza, you take the scoopful, and you put it into a non-consecrated utensil, that nullifies the korban. That ruins the korban. Okay. Rabbi Shimon says it's okay. Why? From Rabbi Yehuda braid Rabbi Chia my time the Rabbi Shimon. Why does Rabbi Shimon say that? Amar Kro, the pasuk says, Kadosh Kadoshim He Kachatas VeKaasham. It is holy of holies. It is like a chatos and like an asham. Ba le'ovda biyad, ovda biyamin kechatas. If you have two choices, if you do the service with your hand, right? So you can take the scoop. You don't have to put it into the utensil. You can put it directly. Then you got to do it with your right hand. Right? Then it's a service like every other service. You got to do it with your right hand. Bikli, if you are put it into a utensil, and then you're going to bring the utensil over, so ovda b'smol, ke'asham, then you could do it with your left hand, right? Which you can do like a korban asham, which is also brought in a utensil, and once it's in the utensil, the holy utensil, so then it doesn't, you can carry that utensil with your left hand as well, even for a korban asham. And so therefore, there are ways in which the mincha, right, you have choices. It's like that. Now, so what Rabbi Eliezer is saying is, a chatos and an asham are usually similar with most things, but in this regard, right, they are brought differently. One has as a voda, it has to be brought with the right hand. The sprinkling of the blood of the korban chatas has to be done with the hand, so therefore it must be done with the right hand. The sprinkling of the korban asham is done with the left. Is it done by taking the whole utensil and throwing it onto the mizbeach? Since it's done with the utensil, if you throw it with my left hand, it's also valid. So that's how we're seeing a difference. And you have a choice when it comes to the mincha, which way you do it, right? You're going to throw it with the utensil directly, or you just take the kmitz and scoop it and don't put it into another utensil, throw it right into the mizbeach. Okay, so, the Rabbi Shimon. So the question is, listen, Gemara wants to know, Rabbi Shimon, Haikra mapik le lahachi, mapik le lahachi. So he says, Rabbi Shimon's learning from these, he's got these two different teachings from the same pasuk. So how is he going to do? Right? He's going to say that it's both things. He's to do it with it. So he says, Iker kra lichta Rabbi Yehuda braid Rabbi Chia huda asa. So he says, really, the main point was the first teaching, this Rabbi Yehuda braid Rabbi Chia, this point that you can bring it with the right hand or with the left hand, right? It doesn't matter whether you're putting it in the utensil or you're not. And uminchas chote de psula shelo lishma taima achrinahu. And this teaching of the minchas chote, that it's puzzle, if you do it shelo lishma, that actually can come from someplace else. Taima achrinahu, that's a different pasuk. Chatos taima mai dechsiv behi minchas chote namiksiv ba he. Right? Why does it say by the korban chatos? Right? It says the word he by it. Right? It is a korban chatos, which tells us it must be brought lishma for a chatos. The minchas chote also uses the word he, which tells me that it also needs to be brought lishma. So now, ulrabanon lemay hilchasa iskish asham lechatos. So I understand everything according to Rabbi Eliezer. I understand the asham and the chatos are compared together because we want to be able to say they're both lishma. We also want to be able to suggest that the korban. We already had other psukim. We had the pasuk, this pasuk to tell me the right hand and the left hand I could use. I also have this pasuk. I also have this other pasuk to teach me that they both the korban chatos, that's a mincha, and a korban chatos, that's a blood offering, both have lishma. Great, but now, why is it, according to the rabbis, right? They are insisting that the korban chatos and the korban asham have different rules. Then why are they compared together? What did they do with the pasuk kachatas ka'asham, which was Rabbi Eliezer's source pasuk to compare the asham and the chatas together? Lo marlach, that is to teach us ma chatas te'una smicha af asham ta'on smicha. Tell me a different rule. A korban chatas, you have to lean on the animal in order to be able to confess your sin. Right, that's part of the. Put your hands on it. When you do your korban asham, your guilt offering, you do also. Okay, so therefore, that's why that's brought. Now it's
And therefore the mincha also you have to do smicha.
no, you don't do smicha on the mincha. No, it's the korban. It's the zevach of chatos as compared to the zevach of asham.
Right.
Right. So the korban the zevach asham needs smicha.
Right. I thought we were comparing to the mincha.
No, that's this. This is kachatos. The pasuk that Rabbi Eliezer is referring to, bringing back to the other original pasuk.
Right, which was
that Rabbi Eliezer says that we were comparing the animal offering of the chatas to the animal offering of the asham, in that he says they both need to be done lishma. Right, but they are saying no. That just means it needs to be smicha. Now, unclear to me. I guess the way that we are concluding that Rabbi Eliezer doesn't require smicha for korban asham, and that's probably potentially the difference. I'm not quite sure what Rabbi Eliezer holds as far as that's concerned. Unclear to me. Okay. Next, Yosef ben Choni Omer Hanishchat. Next line in the Mishnah. Okay, so we've been spending all this time on the Ashams and this. Okay, now Rabbi Yosef ben Choni says that if you slaughter a different korban, we've been saying that if you slaughter the chatos for the sake of a different offering, it's invalid. Slaughter a korban pesach for the sake of a different, it's invalid. What if you take a regular olah and you slaughter it and say this is a chatos? Yosef ben Choni says that is also invalidated. The Chachamim did not say that. The Chachamim seem to say that if an olah for anything else is okay, it's one way it ruins, not the other way. Rabbi Yosef ben Choni says goes both ways. Once you're bringing a chatos into it, it's invalidated. Same thing by Pesach. Amr Rabbi Yochanan, so Rabbi Yochanan says, Yosef ben Choni v'Rabbi Eliezer amru davar echad. That Yosef ben Choni and Rabbi Eliezer are saying the same thing, right?
Bismana. It's going to be Pesach, it's going to be Bisman. The other way it wouldn't.
They said one thing, because Rabbi Eliezer also says that because Rabbi Eliezer also says that any korban that you slaughter on the 14th of Nisan for the sake of a Pesach, and also if you slaughter any offering for the sake of a korban chatos, it is also puzzle. So he holds, that's where Rabbi Eliezer holds the same thing. Rabba says, Ba'achirim l'shem chatos pligi. No, they're arguing, their disagreement is actually, it says, only if you shecht l'shem a Pesach, that invalidates, but not if you shecht l'shem a korban chatos. Right, that's a rule. That's on any day of the year. If I take my olah and I shecht it for an olah, that Yosef ben Choni says is invalid. Rabbi Eliezer says is not. Okay, Titania, because we learned in a brisa, haPesach she'avra shnaso. Let's say a korban Pesach is too old, right? It's already been. It's past a year old. Okay, v'shachto bismano lishmo, and you shecht it on the 14th of Nisan l'shema korban Pesach. Right. Problem is, it's not valid because it's not the right age. Also, if you take another korban and you shecht it on the 14th l'shem korban Pesach, the fact that today is the day for the korban Pesach is now an invalidating knowledge, right? So therefore, Rabbi Eliezer posa. Rabbi Eliezer says that invalidates it. Right, that invalidates it. Rabbi Yeshua machshir. Rabbi Yeshua says no, it doesn't invalidate it. Amar Rabbi Yeshua, because Rabbi Yeshua says.
But it says, right, Acherim l'shem Pesach bismana.
Right.
So it's not
any other korban.
Right.
You take your korban olah on the 14th of Nisan, and you say, "This is my korban Pesach." You've now invalidated that korban olah.
Like after, okay.
Acherim l'shem Pesach, right? Other korbanos for the sake of korban Pesach.
I meant acher.
Not achar, right? Acherim, right? Good.
Fine. That makes sense.
Amar Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says, "In b'shar yemos hashana she'enu kosher lishmo." He says, "Look, on the rest of the year, right? If I shecht my korban Pesach l'shema korban Pesach, right? So then that doesn't invalidate it. Acherim kisherim, so the other korbanos are going to be kosher nevertheless, right? Lishmo bismanoshu kosher lishmo, and so on the day, right? If I shecht a korban Pesach, let's say I take an animal and I shecht it l'shema korban Pesach. If I shecht it, let's say this: if I take a korban Pesach and I shecht it l'shema korban Pesach, and it's not the 14th of Nisan, that's not valid, right? But if I shecht another animal l'shema korban Pesach, that doesn't invalidate. So on Erev Pesach, if I shecht for the sake of a korban Pesach, that Korban Pesach is valid. For sure, if I have in mind a Korban Pesach for a different offering, it's valid. Right? Shechting for the sake of a Korban Pesach doesn't ruin it ever.
Right.
Why would it ruin it today when shechting for the sake of a Korban Pesach is more okay?
Oh, I see.
Right? Shechting on the 14th for Korban Pesach is even better than shechting it for Korban Pesach any other day.
Right.
Okay? So Achirim Lishmo. So Amar Rabbi Eliezer says, yeah, but chiluf hadvarim. He says, or you can look at it the exact opposite way. Ma im b'shar yemos hashana she'eno kosher lishmo. He says, look, if you were to say on any other day this Korban Pesach is a Korban Pesach, it would not work. It would be kosher hu l'shem achirim. Right? If I take my Korban Pesach and I say this should become a shlomim, that would be okay. Bismano, but if you do that on Erev Pesach, shu kosher lishmo, if I do it for its own sake, it would be kosher. Eino din sheyuchsher l'shem achirim, then you're going to tell me it should for sure be kosher for something else, right? The yuchshar Pesach barbas shelo lishmo, and we're using your kavachomer. That means if I shecht my Korban Pesach for something else, it would be kosher. The kacha tomer, and that's what you're supposed to say.
Why does that necessarily work like that, though? Why can't we just say it makes sense the one way? Svara makes sense the one way.
Because we know that that the pasuk says that it's Pesachi, which means that on the day of Pesach it does not work, right? If you shecht my Korban Pesach l'shem other things, it's ruined.
Right, but if I do it l'shem Pesach.
Right.
It makes sense.
So his point is that well, let's say that one again, right? He says, if other days of the year, right? If I shecht for the sake of a Korban Pesach, right? Take it on today. I'm shechting my Korban Pesach today. Okay? So then what would happen, right? If I shecht l'shem Pesach, it's possible. But if I shecht it for a shlomim, take my Korban Pesach and I change it to a shlomim, that would be kosher.
Right.
Okay? Now, but if I do the same thing on Erev Pesach, I take my Korban Pesach and I change it to something else, right? You should say, well, that for sure should be valid because you've just decided that since the day of the 14th makes more sacrifices, the Korban Pesach's more kosher, so then for sure it should be valid. But that's not the rule. It's actually invalid. Exactly, it's invalid.
Right. No, but I was saying that because it's more so much more so, why it should go the other way. Right, like it's a shlom.
So you're so
much more so. Yeah, we want to bring a Korban Pesach. He has an opportunity to bring a Korban Pesach. He by accident had it in mind, right, that it was a Korban Pesach. All the better. I would have thought in that case the reverse would have been good.
Wait, saying which day are we talking about?
Bismana.
So you're on Pesach,
right,
and you're taking a shlomim,
and you're making
and you want to change it to a Pesach, right, and that's no good.
Right.
Why?
That I figure should be good.
Right. So
that argument, that's why it should play out like that.
So this Rabbi Eliezer says you can't. Oh, so that was sort of the position that was being taken by Rabbi Yeshua.
Right. He's saying the reverse isn't good.
Right.
I don't
to which Rabbi Eliezer says, why? Because today is Erev Pesach, and so you're saying it's better because it's Erev Pesach. I'll show you it's worse because it's Erev Pesach.
Right.
Because it's Erev Pesach. Because a Korban Pesach, if I changed it to something else on the 13th, would have been fine. But if I change my Korban Pesach to something else, it's worse on Erev Pesach.
Right. The other way, yeah.
Right? Mm-hmm. So therefore, that's his point. So he says, and furthermore, okay, so kacha tomer, so he says, we know that the halach is not like that. We know that that would be possible if you shach the Korban Pesach shelo l'shmo. Okay? And then, mali hochshiro achirim, b'shar yimoseh. What? He says, I'll also tell you another problem with the Kal V'chomer. He says, look, if you take another korban during the rest of the year, Bishar Yemos Shana, during the rest of the year, and you shecht it lishmo, right, for the sake of a korban lishmo, shekenu kosher l'shem achirim, right? Which korban are we dealing with here? 1 second. Pesach. He says the way that the Kal V'chomer should work, he says, look, if you take another korban, right, your korban, let's say we'll take our korban shlamim, right, and I do it l'shem Pesach, okay, during the rest of the year, for the sake of Pesach, right, which we're going to say is kosher for the sake of another korban, right, but yuchsharu achirim, so then because of that, right? If I take that and I'm other korbanos, I can shecht it for the sake of any other korban. So you should also say that on other korbanos, on Erev Pesach, which you do lishmo, would be pasul shekain hu pasul l'shem achirim, because a korban Pesach is pasul l'shem achirim. In other words, if I took a korban Pesach and I switched it to something else in the rest of the year, that's kosher, well, that should be pasul. Why? Because the korban, according to your Kal V'chomer, whatever's pasul on Erev Pesach should be pasul the rest of the time. Whatever's kosher on Erev Pesach should be kosher the rest of the time. So that means that a korban Pesach should also be pasul. On Erev Pesach, that shalol lishmo of a Pesach is not kosher. So therefore, the same thing should happen to that korban Pesach on the 13th, which is not true. So he said a korban Pesach shalol lishmo is kosher on the rest of the year. So he points out, his point is that Rabbi Yishmael's Kal V'chomer is not valid. So Amar lo Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says, I'll explain what's going on. Im kain hora'asa koach Pesach v'nasata koach bishlamim. So he says, what you've done here is, if what you're saying is true, that all other korbanos, which get shechted for the sake of a korban Pesach, bismano, are pasul, so then what you've done is, you have diminished the power of shalol lishmo of a Pesach, and you've given power to the shlamim more than the Pesach. What does that mean? Why? Because according to you, right, during the whole rest of the year, which is the time that you can bring a korban shlamim, if I take a korban Pesach and I slaughter it for their sake, they are kosher, right? But on the 14th of Nisan, which is the time for Pesach, if I slaughter a shlamim for the sake of a korban Pesach, it becomes pasul. Okay, so therefore, right, what you're showing is that the shalol lishma b'shlamim is more significant than by Pesach, because I can't change a shlamim into a Pesach on Erev Pesach, which is the chumrah, and then we're saying that would be the case the other way. Right, which is not true, because the pasuk says shalol lishmo is more chamar by Pesach, right, not by the other korbanos. So therefore,
I have a question.
What if you have an animal that you've assigned for no particular, like whatever it be,
right, no particular,
Pesach, nothing particular.
Yes,
you just assign every Pesach.
That's the best thing to do.
Okay,
right, do that, because then you can't mess it up. Right? It has to be designated at some point, but we had suggested the best thing to do is designate it exactly when you're slaughtering it. Then you can't mess up. And we will see in Korban in Psachim that that was a good practice. Because exactly your point, right? If I mess it up.
Designate a certain amount of animals only for sacrifices in general, and then be specific later.
Can you designate something as a sacrifice without saying which sacrifice? I'm not sure. Okay. It sounds fine to me, but I'm trying to be able to figure out what type of kedusha it would obtain. Whether it be kedushas haguf, despite the fact that you haven't specified which korban, right? It's best not to sanctify it at all. Right, leave it nothing, and then at the moment you're going to shecht it, then sanctify it right before. That's the way to keep yourself out of trouble. What would happen if you said, "I'm going to sanctify this as a sacrifice"? Right? Does it get kedushas haguf? The answer is, I think so. Right, but it would make sense that you could then designate it later. The answer is, it sounds like you could do that. I can't think of a reason why you couldn't, except I don't remember ever seeing any place where that is the case.
Is that different than designating an animal as sacrifice? Is that different than designating an animal as hekdesh?
No, because generally speaking, if you have any, we will see that if you designate any animal that has no blemishes on it, it is presumed to become a korban. And then that would probably prove where you're coming from. That yes, that would be a unspecified korban of some type, and it would get kedushas haguf. If I specified that this is going to be a animal, I could specify this is kedushas damim, that it's only to be for monetary value, and therefore the korban, the base maker could sell it and get a profit out of it. I could designate for that, but if you don't specify, you just say this animal is hektish, it's presumed to have kedushas haguf. But if you didn't specify, then the point is, which korban would it be? The answer is, clearly it would seem from that you can specify that it is sanctified as a sacrifice without specifying which one. Okay, so Chazar Rabbi Eliezer. So Rabbi Eliezer retracted, and he said, V'dono din acher, he's got a different proof. Matzino moser pesach bo shlomim. Look, let's say I've got a korban pesach, and I lost it. So what do? I get another one. Then I find it. Now I've got two animals to bring as a korban pesach. I can't bring two korban pesachs, and I can't save it for next year because it has to be 1 year old. So now what do? I bring one as a korban pesach. The extra animal is brought as a shlomim. Okay, so that's what happens. Vein moser shlomim ba pesach. What happens if I say I want to bring a korban shlomim, right? And I lose it, and I find it again. Now I've got two korban shlomims. Can I take one of them and make it a korban pesach? No, I cannot. Once it's been designated as shlomim, I can't make it a korban pesach. So that's what it is. Look, I can turn a pesach into a shlomim. I cannot turn a shlomim into a pesach. Uma pesach shemosor ba shlomim. If when it comes to a korban pesach, the extra animal can come as a shlomim. Shachtu bizmano l'shem shlomim. If you shecht it on erev pesach as a shlomim, it's puzzle. That's invalid. So shlomim, if I take a korban shlomim in the first place, she'ein moser ba pesach, which has no shaychus to a pesach, I can't turn it into a pesach under any circumstances. Im shachtom l'shem pesach, if I shecht that for the sake of a pesach, bismano on erev pesach, ein nudin psuin. For sure that should be puzzle, right? Yeah, I know it's hard to be able to follow all these.
No, also because I thought the kasha was if we did it the reverse, like you said, we can't turn a chatos or a pesach bisman into another korban. But the question was, well, could you turn another korban into the reverse? We said chatos, we can't.
Can't turn a so Rabbi Elazar's point is, I cannot turn a shlomim into a pesach.
Right.
I can turn a pesach into a shlomim. Right? I can turn a pesach into a shlomim. Generally speaking, there is such a concept.
Well, why can't you turn a shlomim into a pesach? Why can't you make it turn a pesach?
Because once I designate the animal as it's like the same rule as we had before by the korban tamid. A pesach is sort of like has a shlomim to it, right? It has a shlomim, right? But a shlomim isn't a pesach, right? A shlomim isn't a pesach. So once I designate as a shlomim in general, that's not a pesach. But a pesach, right? That's these. The bottom line really is it's xeris akasa. The Torah tells us what you can do, what you can't do with it, right? It said these are the rules, right? But once you get the rules, then you can start to try to expound on what's going on here. But that's what it really is just trying to do. He says shlomim is connected in some way to a pesach is connected in some way to a shlomim. Nevertheless, right, the day of erev pesach, right? If I shecht it for a shlomim, it doesn't become a shlomim now, right? And sometimes it can become a shlomim, but on erev pesach you can't. So if a pesach can never become a shlomim, so then if I shecht my pesach for a shlomim on erev pesach, sure it's no good. That's his idea. So I'm going to Rabbi Yeshua. Rabbi Yeshua says, no, I'm not buying that either. Rabbi Yeshua says, Matzino moser chatos ba'ola. You know, we could see that if I've got a korban chatos, let's take that same case. I had a korban chatos. I separated it out for my sin offering. And I lost it. And then I separated a second one. Now I find it again. What do you do with the extra animal? Right? Goes to pasture, gets a blemish, sell it, bring an old korban ola with it. Right? But it turns into an ola, the extra one. Turns into an ola. Vein moser ola b'chatos. But if I've got an extra korban ola, that can't turn into a chatos, obviously, because there's no sin for it to be atoning for. Right. So can't turn an ola into a chatos. So now, using your logic, ma chatos shemosra ba'ola, if a chatos, the extra, can turn into an ola, shachta l'shem ola. If I take a korban chatos and I shecht it as an ola, psula, that is invalidated because I can't shecht the korban, I can't shecht the chatos shelo lishma. Right? So then ola, she'ein mosra ba'chatos, so if I have an ola, which doesn't become a korban chatos, shachta l'shem chatos, if I turn that one into a chatos, eino din shei psula, shouldn't that become puzzle, according to your logic? So he says, Amar lo Rabbi Eliezer. Eliezer says, yeah, well, but lo imamar bechatos, shenk sheira lishma kol hashana kula. He says, you can't talk about a chatos. He says, a korban chatos is always valid. We're talking about shlomims and psachim. There's different rules by korban pesach on erev pesach and the rest of the year. Korban chatos never has a day that it's not a korban chatos. So you can't compare chatos to pesach. Those rules aren't. You can't. I'm suggesting you're right. Those rules are not similar, but there's a very good reason why. Chatos is you can bring any day. Can't bring korban pesach every day. You can only bring korban pesach on that one day.
No, actually, and that Pesach Sheni as well. Also have a Pesach Sheni.
For Pesach Sheni as well, right? 2 days. Okay. So ho vehu pasol lishmo, right? So since it is invalid for its sake, din hu sheyivsulu acherem lishmo. It makes sense that others would be invalidated if you shecht it for its own sake. Okay, fine. So that's the difference of perspective between Rabbi Yeshua and Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer suggests that, right? Rabbi Yeshua says that that it's not true if you shecht for the sake of what was Rabbi Yeshua's point. He's machshir if you shecht another offering l'shema korban pesach, right? That's still kosher, right? Rabbi Eliezer says no, I'm not on erev pesach. It's not. Can't do that. Okay, so that was their argument. Now, Rav Ashi mas mishmei Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Ashi taught the following in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. I skipped one, sorry. Shimon Achi Azariah Omer, right? We have the Shimon Achi Azariah that if you always you can always shecht for Gavoa Mehen, right? If you've got Korchim Kalim, if I've got a Shlamim, I can always shecht it as a Asham. But the other way around, I cannot. I can't take an Asham and go down to a Shlamim. Can't go downwards. Can go up and not down. Okay? So, Rav Ashi Masni Mishmei de Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Ashi teaches in the name of Rabbi Yochanan. Rav Acha Brei de Rava Masni Mishmei de Rabbi Yanai. And Rav Acha, the son of Rava, taught it in the name of Rabbi Yanai. My time of the Shimon Achi Azariah. Where does he come from with this? That korbanos can be brought for the up above but not below. Damar Krov, Pasuk says, "V'lo yechalu es kodshe b'nei Yisrael." You shall not profane the korbanos of b'nei Yisrael. Asher yarimu laHashem, that which they elevate to Hashem. B'mora mehem ein mischalin. Right, those things that are higher up, you cannot profane downward. B'namoch mehen, but the things that are left, that are below them, mischalin. Right, so. Right, but if you bring it downward, then they become invalidated. You can't invalidate upward; you can only invalidate downward. That's how this pasuk is read. The Haila Hachihudos, is that what that pasuk is for? V'hami boy le'lecha de Shmuel. That pasuk is necessary according to what Shmuel says. Damar Shmuel. Shmuel says as follows: Minayin lochel tevel shehu b'misa. How do I know that if I eat tevel, right, produce that's grown and trumas and maishros have not been taken off? If a person eats that, he is chayav misa b'dei shemayim. Right? It's
an Avera. You have to take it before you eat.
That's correct. It's Avera, and the punishment is misa b'dei shemayim. How do I know that? Shenamar, from this pasuk, v'lo yichalu es kodshe b'nei Yisrael. You shall not profane the holy objects of the b'nei Yisrael. As asher yarimu Hashem, that which you will elevate to Hashem. Meaning, basidim litrona kasmedar. The pasuk saying, even if you haven't separated out yet, but you will, it's still a prohibition to profane it. Im kain, well, okay. So if that was all the pasuk was saying, so lichtov kra asher hurmu, my asher yarimu shmamine tarti. The answer is it goes both ways, right? That which you will elevate tells me this rule of tevel. The fact that it is elevated, that you can elevate, but you cannot profane, that's from the fact that these extra words are written in the pasuk. So therefore, I learned both of those rules from this pasuk. Both things. You can sometimes do that. By Reb Zera. Reb Zera asked the following question. Ksherin ve'ein meratzin. So he says, they're kosher, but he still agrees that they don't fulfill the obligation of the owner. V'chi polig b'chada, polig odilma ksherin umeratzin ubetarti pligi. How do you know that? Maybe what he's saying is, not only is it true that that he disagrees with the Rabbanan about whether it's valid or invalid, but maybe he even says that if you have the wrong intention upward, it counts. It's still a korban shlamim, even if you brought it as a korban asham, and it counts for the owner. Maybe that's what he says. So Amar Abaye, so Abaye says V'itema Reb Zreika. So in some says Reb Zreika, Toshma, come listen. HaBechor v'hamaser sheshachtu l'shem shlamim. Right? He continues on in the Mishnah. The firstborn animals that are brought as korbanos, and the 10th animal is brought as a korban, that you shech that as a shlamim are kisherim. They are kosher. Shlamim sheshachtu l'shem bechor, but the other way around. Shlamim for a bechor, o l'shem meiser, or for meiser, are psulin. Now, Isaka daitach ksherim rotzin. If they're accepted, so bechor bar ritzu yehu. He says, what would be the eligibility requirement of a bechor? A bechor is just a sanctified animal. There's no obligation on the person to bring a bechor. It's just now that you have a bechor, it gets brought. Right? If my animal's not a bechor, it doesn't get brought. Right?
Bechor firstborn for 10th animals as well.
Yes. So that's you would, if it's a human being, you're not bringing it as a sacrifice, right? So these are the animals should specify, right? There's a firstborn animal, so there's no such. It's not even in the category of being brought for the person. It's just hey, it's firstborn, therefore it's sanctified. Ela ksherin ve'ein miratzin. So therefore, what it means, it's kosher, but it doesn't impact the owner. Now, if you're talking about that when it comes to the firstborn animal, that it's kosher, but it doesn't impact the owner, so then Reisha Nami Ksher V'Mratzin. So too, when you were talking about shlamims brought as for the sake of an ola, for example, that also means it can't work for the sake of the owner because it's consistent, right? The rule is consistent. So he says, Midi area. Who says that? Ha-kadisa v'ha-kadisa. One can be talking about the rules of Bechor, and the rules of Bechor is that there's no such thing as atonement for the owner. And then when it's talking about a Shlamim, where there are rules for atonement, that could be effective. Elamai Kamash Malon. So what is it coming to tell me? Gavoa Menamach Kamash Malon. The only reason it's telling me the Bechor, why does it even bother to mention the Bechor case? The answer is to tell me what the definition of levels of offerings there are. So, one second, it says, meaning that there's not only Koche Kochim, Koche Kalim, but then there's a third level, which is Bechor and Meiser, which is even like a lesser level. So he says, yeah, but Tanina, we already learned that in a Mishnah. We don't need this Mishnah to tell us that. Ketzad Koche Kochim, how do our Koche Kochim Sheshachton L'Shem Kochim Kalim? What's the example of that? So, I already know. He says Koche Kochim. So he says Mahu Detema. No, he says, what would you have thought? Koche Kochim v'Koche Kalim hu de'ika gavo v'namuch. I would have thought there's only two levels, right? There's Koche Kochim, Ola, Chatos, Asham, and there's Koche Kalim, and that's Bechor, Meiser, Shlamim. Those are the personal Shlamim, not Tzibor Shlamim, but personal Shlamim. Those are the lower ones. Aval, Kalim v'Kalim, low, but there's not a third lower level. Hanami Tani. So therefore, it's telling me there's a third lower level. There's Bechor, Meiser, which is lower level than personal Shlamim. Yeah, but Tanino, we already learned that as well. When it comes to Shlamim Kodmin, later on we're going to see, when you have a series of offerings to bring, which one has precedence over the other? And it says, Shlamim Kodmin Esa Bechor, Ibnei Shehun Tonin Matan Arba, Usmicha Unesachim, Utnumas Chazav Shok. Shlamim comes before Bechor because Shlamim has lots of extra steps to it. It has to be brought, it has to be... it has 4 sprinklings on the Mizbeach. It also has smicha. It has to have leaning on it. It also has wine libations and oil libations to it. And it also has waving, as you have to wave parts of the meat. So none of those rules apply to a Bechor. So therefore you see a Korban Shlamim is higher on the priority list than a Korban Bechor. I already know that.
You can make that argument. Then you can go back to an oil and say, well, an oil is not eaten. We don't need the meat of an oil.
So but that's true, isn't it though?
Right.
An ola is Koche Kochim. Right. That's higher than an ola, which we do, higher than a Shlamim, which we do say, right. But that's true. Right. But those are higher. So he says, yeah, but ha-ikr, this Mishnah here, this is the source. This is the main source. The main source is our Mishnah here that says there are 3 tiers, right? Hahi agrora naspa. There is just going through the list and order of korbanos. Once it's going through the list of order of korbanos, it also mentions, yes, but by the way, this one's higher than the other one, since we were also mentioning the list of all the priorities of all the korbanos. We mentioned it. But this is the main point, right? That there's all these different levels. Now, we can move on to a new topic, which is good. I think everybody deserves one. Okay?
We're ready.
It's going to get easier when we get to the next parak, but a little bit, but still, nevertheless. Says the next Mishnah. Ha-Pesach sheshachtu shachris bar basar. Let's say I've got a korban Pesach. And now we know Erev Pesach is the Zman. What we have done so far, even though we had the complicated Kal V'chomers that I went through too fast today, but Korban Pesach, we said the 14th was the time.
Right.
If I bring it shelo lishmo, not for the sake of a Korban Pesach, on any other day, it turns into a shlamim. On the 14th, it becomes puzzle. Now, what happens if I bring it in the morning? Okay, the zman of the Korban Pesach is bein harbayim. Okay, bein harbayim means afternoon, we presume. Okay, so if let's say I bring it in the morning, shelo lishmo, but not for the sake of Korban Pesach, is that the same thing? What happens there? So Rabbi Yeshua machshir, Rabbi Yeshua says that's fine. Ki'ilu nishcha b'shoshasar. It's the same thing as if you had brought it on the 13th and said it wasn't a Korban Pesach. Okay, ben beseira posel ki'ilu nishcha bein arbaim. Ben beseira says no. The 14th is the time of the Korban Pesach. It's the same thing as if you had brought it in the afternoon. And therefore, if you do it shelo lishmo, that ruins the Korban. Okay, so now that's the question. Is the morning Zman of Pesach or not? Amar Shimon ben Azai says, Mekubal ani mipi shivim u'shnaim zekenim. I have a teaching that is accepted from 72 elders. B'yom shoshivu es Rabbi Eliezer b'yeshiva, at the day that they appointed Rabbi Eliezer as the Rosh Yeshiva, shekol Zevachim, they said, all korbanos that are eaten, shenizbechu shelo lishman, that if you sacrifice them not for their sake, ksherin, right? El shelo la'alu lebalim mishum chova. They are kosher, but they don't satisfy the requirement of their owner. Chutz min ha-pesach min ha-chatos, except for the korban pesach and the korban chatos, as we said. V'lo hosif ben Azai ela ha'ola. And the only difference between this teaching that Ben Azai is bringing and the Mishnah that we had learned first was the korban ola. Because according to Ben Azai, he says the ola says this only rule applies to ones that we eat, and ola is not eaten. But when we learned our first Mishnah, we said even an ola shelo lishma is kosher, right? So that's the difference. All that Ben Azai is adding in is the ola. V'lo hodu l'chacham, the chum don't agree with him.
He would hold that the ola doesn't. If you brought it,
he says that ola is shelo lishma would not work.
It would be puzzle.
That's what it sounds like. Exactly. Correct. Okay. Now we get into a great discussion for 4 minutes about the morning of Pesach. Okay, the morning of Pesach. I know we're like almost Erev Sukkot, but it's like 15th, it's Xer Shava. So we're basically on the morning of Pesach, morning of Sukkot, morning of Pesach. So Amar Rabbi Eliezer says, Amar Rabbi Yoshaya. Rabbi Yoshaya says, Machshar haya ben beseira bepesach sheshachtu shachris ba'arba'asar lishmo. Now, our Mishnah says, like backwards, our Mishnah says, if I shecht an animal for the sake of, I take my korban Pesach and I say, do it shelo lishmo. Is it invalidated or not? That was the question of our Mishnah. Now the Gemara wants to know, okay, what would happen if I took my Korban Pesach in the morning and I shechted it for a Korban Pesach? Would that work? Right? What is Ben Beseira saying? When Ben Beseira says that my Korban Pesach in the morning, shelo lishmo, is puzzle because he says it's the Zman of Korban Pesach, does he mean that if I would have shechted it l'shem Pesach, it would work? Right? Dekula yom zmanehu, because he's saying the whole day, the 14th, is the time for the Korban Pesach. Okay, so umay ki'ilu. So then why is he saying it's as though it's the time of the Korban Pesach? What do you mean? It is the time of the Korban Pesach. The Mishnah says, if he shechts it shelo lishmo, it's ruined because it's as though it was the time of the Korban Pesach. No, you really mean that if he shechted it for Pesach, it would work. So that means it is the time of the Korban Pesach. The answer is no. He's just using the same language. Aidi d'amar Rabbi Yeshua ki'ilu. Since Rabbi Yeshua said, no, it doesn't work because it is like you were doing it on the 13th, right? And so it has the same rules. So ihunami ki'ilu. So he used the same language. But he doesn't mean that it's not the time. So he would say if you shechted it with l'shem Korban Pesach, it would be valid. Iachi, if that's true, ad mifleki b'shelo lishmo, liflegel b'shelo lishmo, then why is the Mishnah going out of its way? It's like backwards. The Mishnah says if I take my Korban Pesach and I do it for the wrong information, then is it valid or it is invalid? Why didn't you just do it simple? Let's say I take my Korban Pesach and I shecht it for Korban Pesach. Is it valid or is it not valid? That seems to be a much clearer question. So the answer is, if they would have argued about whether your Korban Pesach was valid in the morning or not, Havamina, I would have thought, Aval b'shelo lishma modi Rabbi Yeshua leben beseira. I would have thought that even Rabbi Yeshua, who would have said the morning is not the time for a Korban Pesach, it wouldn't work if you did L'shem Korban Pesach, he might agree to Ben Beseira that it wouldn't invalidate it if you did it not for the Korban Pesach.
Right.
Because it is the day, but it's not the day. Whole mixed because it's a little, right? The morning is a little. like it, right? Kamash malon. So therefore, this is coming to tell me that the argument is across the board. According to the opinion that says the morning is valid as a korban pesach, it also invalidates shalolosh paying korban pesach. And according to the opinion that says it is not the time of korban pesach, it is valid to do it shalolosh paying korban pesach. Okay. Now the problem is v'ksiv bein harbayim. How can you hold that the morning is the time for the korban pesach? Doesn't it say bein harbayim? Bein harbayim translated is the afternoon, between the two evenings. So we'll say. So Amar Ula. So Ula explains Braid Rav Eloi. So Amar Ula, he says, means like this: Bein shnei aravim. It's between the two evenings, means between last night and tonight, the whole day. New novel approach to what Bein Arbayim says. Now the problem that we're going to have, which we'll continue on this evening, is we've got the word Bein Arbayim many times in Psukim. And if you've just reinterpreted the word Bein Arbayim to mean the whole day, you have several conflicts with rules of things that we know only exist in the afternoon. And how are you going to interpret those Psukim? So that's what we're going to pick up.
Beautiful.
This evening.
Right, just to go over quick. So Shaloi Lishmo would hold, it should be valid both either way. Sorry, if it's not the day.